Hello there. Welcome in to a Friday edition of the show. So glad to have you, whether you're listening on 740 KVOR, Extra Sports 1300, or either of those two fine radio stations streaming apps where you can get uninterrupted, crystal clear audio of this or any show on either of those two stations. They are both free to download. They are both free to use. And they are both sponsored by Diversus Health, mental health and well-being for all. Now, I am in a different spot today, as you might notice if you were watching on the live stream. That is because coming up at 3:30, a rare occasion to have Air Force hockey this early in the day, but they are in at Niagara, and Jay Ritchie and Dave all for you are covered starting at the bottom of this hour. So if you would like to hear Air Force hockey and you are on Extra Sports 1300, you are in the exact right place. However, if 3:30 rolls around and you'd like to stick with me, I would be honored, and you would need to flip over to 740 KVOR, and the reverse is true if you're on KVOR and want to listen to Air Force hockey or stick with me. So I think we got it, right? So veritable cornucopia of sports topics, regardless of what station you are listening on, and I'd love to get your thoughts at 719-247-1313. Let's start with our question of the day, which you can find on Facebook, and also you can find me saying it right now. It is Friday before the Super Bowl. So the question is, who you got? What are your predictions? Obviously, we could go as granular as you want to, MVP, spread, all of that kind of stuff, but just your predictions for this Super Bowl are very much welcome, and allow me to start the show with mine. My initial thoughts after Championship Sunday were that whatever team comes out of the NFC is the much better football team. And I still believe that. I still believe that Seattle is the better football team here. But I don't know that it's going to mean that we're going to get a blowout on Sunday. Because mainly how well coached New England is. And you saw it in the AFC Championship that Mike Vrabel did a phenomenal job managing that game and everything that came along with it, including a snowstorm, which will not be a factor on Sunday. But I think New England is coached well enough that I think New England is going to have a chance to win this game. However, one thing that the Denver Broncos could not do to the New England Patriots, and I believe Seattle can do. If you recall when we were talking leading up to the AFC Championship, you know, the conversation about Drake May's ball security. And because of a variety of different reasons, first, because of the Broncos' mistakes that gave New England life and gave them a short field with the Jared Stidham backwards pass, and the snowstorm that hit in that second half, they never drew Drake May out. They never put Drake May in a situation where at his young age, and he would be the youngest quarterback to ever win a Super Bowl, they never put him in a position where he was forced to stretch out a little bit, right? Where he had to make plays. They ran the flea flicker in the second half, but that I think caught most everybody, including the Denver Broncos, by surprise. What Seattle, I think, will do in this game that Denver could not against New England was force Drake May to beat them. Maybe not. Maybe it's just a moment or two. Maybe it's just in the most crucial moments of the game. But I have a hard time believing that New England can play essentially the way they played against the Denver Broncos and expect to win this game. Right? They're not going to have this snowstorm coming in that's basically going to turn it into a half of a game. The New England Patriots are going to have to play a full 4-quarter game. And when we have seen New England in these playoffs play a full 4-quarter game, it's a little dicey. Right? What we would be talking about how Drake May wasn't ready for the moment the round before they played Denver, if not for C.J. Stroud being even more not built for the moment with Drake May's ball security issues. Now, could some of that be tied to the weather? I think a little bit. But if you watch Drake May throughout the season, I do think that there are some legitimate concerns at his age that he doesn't take as good care of the ball as he will have to long term. And look, that will come for Drake May. That's part of what's remarkable about this Super Bowl is that New England and to a lesser extent Seattle just kind of got here. Right? This New England team especially, they don't have all this scar tissue built up of playoff failures. And that's not their fault. Like, hey, they showed up this year like everybody else, and they just happened to be better than the vast majority of the teams that they played. But they have such a young quarterback and one that struggled with ball security, and I think you're going to combine that with an offense on the other side. Because when I talk about drawing out Drake May, I'm actually talking about what Seattle's offense can do to draw him out. This is not about the Seahawks defense making Drake May beat them. This is about the Seattle offense producing and putting up enough points and putting New England in a position where they got to go to Drake May to make a big play with his arm. And I think Seattle, unlike Denver with Jared Stidham and with the conditions and all that, are going to be able to move the ball against this New England defense and will be able to put up points. This is not going to be a 10-7 football game. So ultimately, what I think this game will come down to is, do I trust Drake May to make a play when everyone knows he has to? Right? The flea flicker, the bootleg, the design QB run that Josh McDaniels called at the end of that game, it kind of caught a lot of people by surprise. I think there's going to be at least one moment, maybe the decisive moment of this game, where everyone knows that Drake May's got to make a play with his arm. And is he ready for that particular moment? Going against a Seattle defense that has been the most opportunistic defense that we have seen in these playoffs. They lead the NFL playoffs in turnovers. I think Seattle's offense will be productive enough to put Drake May and the New England offense in a position where they got to go to the air. And they got to put it on the shoulder of their 23-year-old quarterback, who's just barely passed a rookie in terms of his experience. And then there is the Seattle defense, as opportunistic as they are, to maybe make a play. As I look at this game, and I even think it may come down to that particular play, and the defensive player for the Seahawks that picks it off might win MVP. And, with as much time as we have to kind of go through all the machinations of what we believe this game could be, I see Drake May late in this game having to make a play with his arm and maybe throwing an interception, and that being the game-deciding play. So I know the smart money is certainly to pick either Drake May, which quarterback you think will win, or maybe a Kenneth Walker or a Travion Henderson. I kind of think that somebody on Seattle's defense might end up winning the MVP of the Super Bowl. But I think it's Seattle's offense putting up enough points to force New England to match them, not on the ground, but through the air. And that would play right into the hands of Mike McDonald and this Seattle defense. And it's almost, and I was talking with producer Ray Dominguez about this earlier, like I almost kind of feel like a lot of the historical stuff that's being brought into this game, obviously the way that the last Super Bowl played between Seattle and New England went, but also the Sam Darnold story, that line of where he was seeing ghosts against New England. I look at this game and say this is some serious demons that are going to be exercised by Sam Darnold and this Seattle team, because I think it's going to be New England's quarterback and not Seattle's that makes the grave mistake that gives Seattle a win. And it's not Sam Darnold that's the quarterback that's going to be seeing ghosts with all these exotic looks that Mike McDonald can bring defensively. I think it's going to be Drake May. So I think the Seattle Seahawks are going to win this game. I don't think it's going to be a blowout, although a fast start for New England is imperative. They cannot fall behind early, or else it could get ugly. How's 27-20 sound? I don't love score predictions, but that's the kind of game I'm thinking. Obviously, ideal conditions in Santa Clara, so I think both teams will be able to put up points. But I got Seattle winning this game and a defensive player. I'll nail down who that is. As if I'm going to be able to thread the needle this well. I had both LA and Denver winning their respective conference championships. So if I get this much right, please excuse me if I don't pick the right defender. If I get the score, the winner, and the fact that a defensive player wins MVP, I think that'll be a pretty good amount of predictions for one man who didn't even have this being the matchup, even as recently as 2 weeks ago, let alone at the beginning of the season. But that's kind of the way that I see this game going. And yes, for those of you who are interested, that would be Seattle also covering the 4.5 points that they are currently favored by. But I'll take your thoughts at 719-247-1313. Who you got in the Super Bowl? Who do you think is going to stand out? I want to talk about some of these storylines, especially the one with Sam Darnold. So plenty more Super Bowl talk to come on this Friday. Again, if you're on KVOR, you'll have me for the duration of the show. If you're on Extra, don't forget that coming up at the bottom of the hour is Air Force hockey. So if you're listening on Extra We got one more segment together. For those of you on KVOR, we got the full 3 hours, and we're just getting started here on 740 KVOR and Extra Sports 1300. Nothing says I love you this Valentine's Day like jewelry, especially jewelry you didn't have to pay for. When a $299 lab-grown diamond heart pendant from Louisa Graff Jewelers by entering to win at extrasports1300.com or kvor.com, kvor.com. You can enter there as well. The contest ends on Sunday, so make sure you do that sooner rather than later. Again, coming up in about 10 minutes, it will be Air Force hockey against Niagara on Extra Sports 1300. So if you would like to, and either way, I'm good. I like Jay and Dave, so if you want to hear some Air Force hockey, I will not take offense to it. But if this show will continue beyond 3:30 on 740 KVOR, so make the necessary adjustments if you need to on your radio dial. Now, there's some I don't want misery loves company, I guess is the way that I will put it here. I don't want to say it's good to see other teams besides the Denver Nuggets getting hurt, because you don't want anybody to get hurt. But the Nuggets aren't the only team dealing with injuries. On that front, by the way, Peyton Watson officially going to be out for at least 4 weeks with a hamstring strain. Same could be the case for Luka Doncic. The Lakers star last night hurt his hamstring, and Dave McMenamin of ESPN tweeted just a little while ago, says there's some initial optimism that Luka is not dealing with a major issue with his left hamstring, but he's definitely not going to play Saturday against the Warriors. So until we know that Luka does not have the same grade of a hamstring strain, and essentially, more medical information than you need to know, if it's a grade 1, then Luka's probably back after the All-Star break, so that means he's missing, 3-4 games. If it's a grade 2, which I believe is what Peyton Watson has been diagnosed with, you're talking about a month. And the reason why this matters, this is not a conversation about the race in the West, because the Lakers, as you know, are not serious title contenders. But what this is important to is the MVP race. Because to me, Luka is the MVP at this moment in time. Now, no MVP has ever been given out this early unless it's Kendrick Perkins and he makes up his mind before the season even begins. But the way things have gone so far, Luka would be my MVP. The issue, though, is that we have this pesky 65-game threshold. More on that in a moment, but just the reality of the situation. We already know that Nikola Jokic can miss one game. That's it. Jokic misses one game, and he can't win the MVP. Or he misses 2, I should be clear. Misses 1, he's okay. Misses 2 games, and he's ineligible to win the MVP. Victor Wembanyama, somebody who I think certainly would deserve consideration at this moment, is not on a good pace to reach that threshold. He can miss only 3 games before he is deemed ineligible, and you know his history. If Luka is out for a significant amount of time, let's just say he's back after the All-Star break, his number would be 5. He misses 5 more games, and he's right at that threshold. We are looking at a realistic chance that we're having a conversation about the MVP by default, which is, I don't think, what anybody wants. And nobody intends for it to be this way. But because of that 65-game threshold, and because Nikola Jokic was hurt, he was out. He's never been out for as long as he was just out. It's never happened. Luka, despite what Dallas may tell you about his fitness level, does tend to play through things and does tend to be available. Wemby hasn't had a great go of it when it comes to his health so far. But those are three guys that right now I think should be an MVP consideration that are legitimately flirting with not even being allowed to be in consideration. And again, that's not what this rule was supposed to be about. This rule was put in place for Joel Embiid. If we're being really honest about it, the Golden State Warriors, right? This is about Kawhi Leonard. This is about load management. This is trying another measure by the NBA to combat load management. And when you do something like this, that you have the purest of intentions, there is something called the law of unintended consequences. And the NBA might be flirting with that law this year. And Michael Malone talked about this on ESPN the other night before the Nuggets-Knicks game. This rule was not made for Nikola Jokic, who demands to be on the floor every single night and just so happened to have Spencer Jones step on his foot. Right? That's not what this is supposed to be about. But you can't always worry about the law of unintended consequence because it's a law for a reason. It's inevitable. It's unavoidable. You're going to have situations where guys are going to be impacted that you didn't create the rule for. But I, for one, think that the rule is a good rule. I don't have a problem with the 65-game threshold. Because of what it was put in place for. And the fact that when you really boil down to it, I mean, 17 games that's not nothing. So I am overall in favor of this rule. Maybe it needs tweaking. Maybe is 65 a little bit too punitive. I'm certainly open to suggestion on that. But, I mean, Nikola Jokic missed basically a month of the season. If you want to make your entire season count, and that's the problem with the NBA as well, nobody cares about what happens before Christmas. So this is also the NBA trying to make the early season games matter, and I don't fault them in attempting that. But they could have a bit of a mess on their hands here because you could have Jokic, Luka, and Wemby all ineligible. And there's, Shea now has this abdominal strain. He's certainly out till after the All-Star break. But who knows how much longer? He's only being reevaluated. So you have 4 legitimate MVP candidates that are going to be flirting with not being eligible. And if that all comes to fruition, if Jokic, it might just be Jokic and Luka. If the two of them put up the numbers that they have been putting up and they happen to play 64 games, there is going to be an outcry for them to change this rule. And I don't think that's a bad thing. But I think the rule itself is a good one. Maybe it is too punitive, and maybe this is a terrific case study to find out if it's too punitive. Because I don't think anybody's really had a problem with this rule since its institution until now. But we'll see what the news is with Luka. Jokic is already at the limit. He's got only one game that he can miss. And if Luka's hamstring injury is worse than originally expected, then he might not be eligible either. Pause for a second so we can Tell those of you listening on Extra Sports 1300 that Air Force hockey is coming up. For those of you who want to stick with this conversation, you can flip on over right now to 740 KVUR, but go ahead. Bye-bye, those of you on Extra. Enjoy Air Force hockey between the Falcons and Niagara on Extra Sports 1300. So, we'll see where this rule goes and who's going to end up not meeting the threshold, because there's also a world, it's a quite optimistic world, but let's live in it for a moment, that Nikola Jokic, based on his prior history, not the fact that he's missed games this year, but the fact that he plays almost every game, maybe he only misses one more game. So if that were to happen, if Nikola Jokic only misses one more game, can he win the MVP? And I was of the mind that no, he couldn't. Even before the injury and all this other stuff, I thought that Nikola Jokic was basically done winning MVPs for two reasons. One, because voter fatigue is a real thing. And two, because I thought with the moves that the Denver Nuggets made, there wouldn't be quite the conversation that there used to be about how Nikola Jokic has no help. Now he's got an all-star teammate. That's never happened. And the depth that the Denver Nuggets have, they're the best. And I keep saying this, and they got to win a title for them to truly be the best Nuggets team ever. But if everybody's healthy, this is the most talent that a Denver Nuggets team has had on one roster ever. So Jokic has help. And what you found out while he was hurt is that definitely they're not just Nikola Jokic. So I thought even as recently as a couple of weeks ago that there was no chance that Nikola Jokic would win MVP. But with the rash of injuries that the Denver Nuggets have sustained this year, and who knows what's coming down the pike in the coming weeks and months. I hate to be, Debbie Downer, but I mean, look at the way the season is going. I mean, Jokic might be from a personnel standpoint, it might be back to what it was. He may not have Aaron Gordon until the stretch run of the season. We may not see Peyton Watson for 6 on the same timeline, potentially, depending on how it goes when he's reevaluated in a month. He still has Jamal Murray, and that will certainly be as maybe a reason why he should not win MVP. But I think what it will come down to is if Luka to me would have to miss the threshold. Like he would have to dip below it for Nikola Jokic to edge him out. I don't have a lot of doubt that Nikola Jokic is going to put up I think he might average a triple-double. But if this is a mild hamstring strain and not a serious one, and he comes back after the All-Star break, I think he has a chance to continue his MVP campaign here. And with Shea, I just think, I mean, you want to talk about somebody with help. I mean, Shea has a lot of help. This team, even without Jalen Williams, was 24-1. So I think if everything continues this way and Nikola Jokic is eligible I'd probably vote for Luka. But if Luka falls off either because he doesn't meet the threshold or he just, falls off in his play, it's threading the needle, but I think Jokic might be able to do it and might be able to play at least 65 games, and we'd have a real conversation about whether he's the MVP or not. But I think the bigger story moving forward is, will the NBA re-examine the 65-game rule? If 3, maybe even as many as 4 legitimate MVP candidates do not reach it. And forget MVP, all pro, all NBA. These guys won't be eligible for that either. So I think we're heading into a direction where the 65-game rule is certainly going to be discussed. But with everything going on, maybe, just maybe, Nikola Jokic can get to the end of the year and have a legitimate argument for MVP. 719-247-1313. You can call or text in your thoughts on that. Do you think Jokic has a chance to win the MVP? And what do you think about the 65-game rule? Yeah, it wasn't made for Nikola Jokic, but is it best for the league? Take your thoughts on that when we come back. Speaking of MVPs, the NFL handed out theirs last night. Tell you who it was and whether I agree with it next on 740 KVOR. Welcome back. Drive Time Sports here on 740 KVOR. Right now on Extra Sports 1300, it is Air Force Hockey. If you are interested in tuning in to that, just was talking about this 65-game rule, and now Luka is flirting with the potential of him being ineligible. Nikola Jokic already down to just one game that he can miss. And speaking of this, coming down from Vinny Benedetto, Nuggets beat writer for the Gazette, Nikola Jokic is questionable for tomorrow's game against the Bulls. Again, he can miss only one game. And then he can miss no more. So I guess the better way to put it would be he can only miss 2 games. Or he can't miss 2 games. But he's questionable for tomorrow's game against the Chicago Bulls. Now, the Denver Nuggets did mention this via Shams Charania in his reporting shortly before Nikola Jokic came back. He said that the Nuggets weren't going to worry about that stuff. They weren't going to worry about postseason awards, which I think we would all be on board with the idea of, yeah, definitely prioritize having Nikola Jokic for the playoffs. But in the world of having your cake and eating it too, maybe, just maybe, there's a chance that Jokic would not dip below the 65 games and he'd be ready for the playoffs. But as I say that, the fact that he is listed as questionable for tomorrow tells me, I mean, he just came back. We're a week removed from his return, and he's already questionable again. So might end up being a moot point in terms of Jokic's MVP viability, but that 65-game rule, especially if he's ineligible, it's going to be a conversation. Does it need to be up by a little bit? Maybe. But I think the intent behind the rule is good. Even though it's kind of born out of a very unfortunate thing, which is load management. 719-247-1313. This coming in from Brett. Says, with all the hamstring pulls and tweaks that the Nuggets have had this year, it is time to start looking at the trainer and the nutritionist to see what they should be doing differently. Also, if players aren't hydrating and stretching properly, that is on both the player and the conditioning and wellness staff of the Nuggets. And I've seen that conversation come up over the last couple of days, and I understand why. But also look at and I just talked about Luka. Right? Luka with the hamstring. The soft tissue injuries. It's not a Nuggets problem. In fact, Nikola Jokic was not out with a hamstring injury. And I know that's not what Brett's referring to. He's not talking about Jokic. He's talking about Peyton Watson now being out. Aaron Gordon's injury is a hamstring injury. But if you look at the soft tissue injuries, it's an NBA issue, right? Because it was the hamstring that would turn into an Achilles tear, Jason Tatum, Tyrese Halliburton. So I don't know. I'm not to the point right now that I'm looking at the Nuggets training staff or David Adelman. I know Adelman, especially with Aaron Gordon, got pressed a little bit the other night about his usage. And David Adelman's like, look, Aaron Gordon went through the stress test. He was good. He was cleared. This is an NBA issue, which doesn't help. It almost runs counter to this 65-game rule, right? The NBA is saying we need you out there for 65 games. Meanwhile, the teams are going, we're having guys getting injured to soft tissue injuries, and we're trying to play it safe, and we're trying to protect them, but you're saying with your 65 game rule that they got to play. And that's the other aspect of this too with the 65 game rule. You're doing it to keep teams from load managing players, but meanwhile, the last couple of years there's been kind of a epidemic of soft tissue injuries. Now, is it because guys aren't playing? Is load management the reason for these soft tissue injuries? But it's not just a Nuggets issue. In fact, the Nuggets weren't nearly as impacted by the rash of these injuries the way that some of these other teams were. But this is a league thing. This is not a specifically Denver Nuggets thing. And you also have to take into account who's suffering what injuries. Nikola Jokic didn't have a soft tissue injury. Cam Johnson has the same thing Nikola Jokic did, which, by the way, to that end, Vinny Benedetto saying that the Nuggets are have upgraded him to, I believe, questionable. So he's the same as Jokic, which maybe should make you optimistic about Cam Johnson, but pessimistic about Nikola Jokic, because looking at it, I don't know if either play tomorrow. But that means that Cam Johnson is on his way back. But the Nuggets injuries are not just the soft tissue ones. But they have so many, and I think that's the reason for Brett's text is that he's not just referring to necessarily the soft tissue injuries, but remember the Denver Broncos had this. There was a conversation about Denver and if they were. And Sean Payton wore it like a badge of honor the last couple of years that his teams were as healthy. So maybe there is some to it. I just think that you need to look at the entire NBA. And if you do, you see a lot of guys getting hamstring tweaks and Achilles tears and these soft tissue things. But the Nuggets got to be. I mean, I feel for David Adelman. I really do, because what he's having to juggle right now, it's not fun. And now you got this perception out there that the Nuggets aren't, in a way, taking care of their players. Like something is wrong with the way that they are being prepared for games. To Brett's text. And he's got guys that are out, guys that are on minutes restrictions, and they're still trying to win basketball games. They're only a game up on the play-in right now. Very difficult spot. David Adelman, his first full year on the job, he's earning his stripes. I think you thought at the beginning of the year, like this was all going to be sunshine and rainbows for David Adelman. Look at how deep the roster is, and he's got Jokic and Jamal Murray's playing at a high level. It's going to be easy for David Adelman to coach this team. And now all the injuries have hit. And I've been impressed. I really have. I've been impressed with David Adelman and the way he's been able to balance all of this. But it's a tricky situation, and the Nuggets are one of the more adversely impacted teams due to injury. I mentioned this yesterday. They don't lead in man games lost. But as I said on the show yesterday, it's the revolving door. Brown's out, then he's in, then he's out again. Now he's back. Aaron Gordon was in and he's out. That's what's so frustrating and so difficult for the Nuggets to handle. If they just had, like Nikola Jokic, you saw with Nikola Jokic's injury, they managed, right? They said, we got to do this and we got to change our rotations this way. And they were able to do very well without Nikola Jokic because they knew he was going to be out for X number of games. It's almost more difficult now that he's on the minutes restriction and Cam Johnson's now on his way back and Christian Brown just came back. He's on a minutes restriction. If a guy's out and he's out for a while, you can navigate that. The Nuggets can figure out a way to survive without Aaron Gordon and now without Peyton Watson. But when they come back, it almost becomes trickier because David Adelman is going to have to watch their minutes. He's going to have to rebuild the rotations. Nuggets and Bulls tomorrow. Again, Cam Johnson questionable, Nikola Jokic questionable. Jokic can, if he misses tomorrow, that's it. There's no more margin for error. He misses one more game if he doesn't play tomorrow, ineligible for postseason awards. MVP shot gone. But positive on the Cam Johnson front because it means he's progressing and may be back. But I think this means he'll be back before the All-Star break. Chance to reintroduce himself to Nuggets fans. 719-24-7-1313. Coming up next, NFL Honors was last night, one of the closest MVP races that we have had in more than 20 years. Did the voters get it right? And who did end up getting in the Hall of Fame after all the news about who wasn't going to be inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame? All that's coming up as we continue on this Friday edition of Drive Time Sports. You're listening on KVOR and KVOR.com. Be back after a look at traffic. Welcome in hour 2 on this Friday. Drive Time Sports on 740 KVOR. And just KVOR for the rest of the show today because Air Force Hockey is on Extra Sports 1300. And I say that knowing that if you're listening, you're in the right place. You're hearing me. But in case you're interested in Air Force Hockey, that is going on Extra Sports 1300 right now. In fact, they're just getting ready to drop the puck there in Niagara Falls. Also, there's a way that regardless of which station or stations I am on a daily basis, you can consume this program, and that is by watching the show on the social media platforms of both Extra Sports 1300 and 740 KVOR. So if you follow at Extra Sports 1300, at 740 KVOR, you can watch the show. And while you're there, if you would be so kind as to like, subscribe, follow, that helps out me. It helps me out, and I would appreciate it. And more importantly, leave a comment because this is an interactive experience that we have on a daily basis. A more traditional way of reaching out to the show is by calling or texting in at 719-247-1313. Last night, the NFL had their NFL honors, and we had the closest MVP vote since 2003, where Matthew Stafford edged out Drake May by a single vote. And we knew it was going to be close. And I just think we've been fortunate, I think, the last 2 years that there is a real debate because there are multiple incredibly deserving players. I think Drake May, you got to kind of, disregard what's happened in the playoffs. It is a regular season award, right? It's hard to mentally, but the voting came in before the postseason began. But really, it could have gone either way between Drake May and Matthew Stafford. And look, I'm not one to say, well, I'm glad Matthew Stafford won it because Drake May is going to have plenty of more opportunities, because that's not necessarily true. I'm going to talk about the way the Hall of Fame vote went coming up, and all the discussion about Bill Belichick and now Robert Kraft. The idea, like, if they're deserving, just vote for them. This idea of someone has to wait their turn is nonsense. If they are eligible for an award or eligible to be voted in the Hall of Fame and they are deserving, then vote for them. Stop waiting around. This is why Mike Shanahan has waited so long to get in the Hall of Fame, because it's like, well, it's this guy's turn. Like, he's been waiting. Who cares? Is Mike Shanahan more deserving than that guy? Then you vote Mike Shanahan. That's the way this is supposed to work. So I'm not glad that Stafford won it over Drake May because, Drake May's going to have plenty. He may never have another opportunity. This may be the best. I don't think it's going to be the best year Drake May, but it could be. But I think Stafford was more deserving. And really, I could go down the numbers and just drown you in a sea of digits. I'm not going to. Right? If you want to get into that because you think that there's a strong statistical argument that Drake May deserves it over Matthew Stafford, then we can have it a little bit later. But what it kind of came down to for me, both of them had similar seasons. Did you notice last night that Drake May's head coach was the coach of the year? And his offensive coordinator, Josh McDaniels, was named assistant of the year. Josh Allen won the MVP last year because of the he did more with less argument. Okay, and it's hard to make that with Stafford. I grant you. He has Puka, he has Devontae Adams. But who is leading who here? Right? What was the bigger reasons for success? And I just think that Stafford deserves more credit for what the Rams did this year than Drake May deserves with the Patriots by only the 1 vote margin, by just the slimmest of margins. This is not knocking Drake May, because I don't think there was another candidate outside of those two that should have been voted for. And I'll get to that momentarily, because 2 other quarterbacks were given first place votes. But by the slimmest of margins, I look at what Matthew Stafford did in the more difficult of the 2 conferences and being a little bit more of the driver of the success of the Los Angeles Rams. And that, to me, makes him, if I were voting, I would have given Matthew Stafford my vote. But I can't sit here and say that if somebody voted for Drake May, they're crazy. Because, I mean, it deserves to be 1 vote. And I'm not a co-MVP guy, because I know that that's a question. Well, why don't they just share MVP? I don't like that. Most valuable player, 1. It sucks for Drake May. It really does. I feel for the guy. But he has a chance to win something more important on Sunday. And that, again, not the reason to vote against Drake May, because, again, nobody knew that New England was going to make the Super Bowl. I'm just saying, like, Drake May has a chance to make this week end up okay, right? But it was really splitting hairs. But I think that the voters got it right. I think Matthew Stafford was the MVP this year. Now, it's not like the presidential election in this regard, right? Whenever you talk about like Ralph Nader, who does Ralph Nader take votes from? Well, that's about ideology, right? Ralph Nader's a little bit more liberal. So if somebody votes for Ralph Nader, it takes away votes from the Democrat. If there's an independent, or Bernie Sanders when he was an independent, when it's a more conservative leaning independent, then it takes it away from the Republican that's running. You don't really have that here with the MVP. You really can't do that and say that the votes that went to the other 2 quarterbacks that received votes would have gone to Drake May. Although, well, let me just go this way. So the 1 vote that everyone is harping on, because it was a singular vote, was for Justin Herbert. And I don't think that anyone other than Matthew Stafford or Drake May were the MVP of this league. So I disagree with, and I believe it's Sam Monson, who may write for Pro Football Focus. I have to check his affiliation, but he came out on Twitter last night and said, it's me. I voted for Justin Herbert. If you're going to go the Nader route, I actually think that Justin Herbert has a little bit more of an argument than Josh Allen, who received 3 first-place votes. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe it is kind of like the presidential election, that the Josh Allen voters probably took away from Drake May, because you're looking at the AFC East and saying Josh Allen is the most valuable quarterback in that division, which would be wrong this year. Drake May was. And Drake May's team finished above Josh Allen's team. And Josh Allen wasn't, I don't think he was as good as he was last year. I mean, that's not really what you take into account, but I'm saying that Josh Allen had some real flaws this year. I mean, he was great, don't get me wrong. So maybe that we did have that kind of thing that we see in presidential elections sometimes. Voting for the third-party candidate takes away from one specific candidate. But I think there's more of an argument for Justin Herbert than there is Josh Allen. And it's actually the exact same argument that people made for Josh Allen last year. Justin Herbert had both of his offensive tackles hurt for the vast majority of the year, had no protection up front. The running back room was banged up, and yet in one of the toughest divisions in football, certainly one of the better divisions in football, still ended up second to the Denver Broncos. Again, not a better case to be made than Drake May or Matthew Stafford, in my opinion. But if you're going to go third-party candidate, I think Justin Herbert's a better way to go than the three people who went for Josh Allen. But I do think overall they did get it right when it comes to Matthew Stafford being named MVP, regardless of how the votes were split and what votes would have gone to Drake May and what votes should have gone to Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford is deserving of being an MVP. And I was also thinking about this with Matthew Stafford. You know, Drew Brees gets in the Hall of Fame. That should not be a shocker to you. He was the most deserving of all the candidates up this year, all the finalists. Like, Drew Brees kind of goes down as he was amazing, but he had the unfortunate timing of competing at the same time as Peyton Manning and Tom Brady. And in a world where, you know, Brady and Manning don't exist, what is Drew Brees? What does he become? I mean, he's already more prolific in many ways than those guys. I guess Tom Brady hanging on a little bit longer helped him. But like, it was the Brady Manning era, and there was also Drew Brees. And it's not to diminish him, but it's to say that he's not Manning and he's not Brady. But in a world where either one of them don't exist, you don't have quite the rivalry, certainly from one from the NFC and one from the AFC. But it just, for so much of Drew Brees' career, he was known as kind of the other guy. With Matthew Stafford, this guy has had an even rougher go of it in that regard, because he played during the Peyton Brady era, but he also ran the minute he was kind of rid of those guys, here comes Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. So Matthew Stafford, and when we talk about the best quarterbacks in the league, he's like Brees. He's kind of the next guy up. Like, you don't put Stafford above Lamar or Mahomes or Allen or even Joe Burrow, but he's like the very next guy. Not with them, but then the next guy. And it's kind of like with Drew Brees. He's not Peyton or Brady, but he's like the next guy. Matthew Stafford has kind of been in that next guy thing his entire career. But I look closer at who his real peers would be, because he's like younger than Manning and Brady and Brees, but he's significantly older than Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, so he's not really a peer with any of those guys. or yeah, I guess peer would be the right word. Contemporary. That would be he'd be a contemporary to Brady and Manning. But like he's not a part of either. He's kind of his own on his own island. And I was looking at some of the quarterbacks that you would compare Stafford to in terms of, being really of his, if you want to say, generation. And we're talking Flacco. Um, I mean, there were some busts in there like Bradford. I think would be around the same time as Matthew Stafford. I think Joe Flacco has had a great career, but like Matthew Stafford for like I think it's a 4-year stretch of quarterbacks being taken around Matthew Stafford's time. Matt Ryan is another one. I think Matt Ryan went the year before Stafford did. I mean, in his era, generation, whatever you want to call it, that group that he was in, I think he stands alone. I think he's head and shoulders above Flacco and Matt Ryan. But Matt Ryan had the MVP, and now Stafford has one to go along with Super Bowl. It's an interesting career. The timing of Stafford coming in, also the fact that he was so good, but the Lions were so bad. And then he goes to LA and finally is now getting the things that he deserves, competing for Super Bowls, MVPs. He deserved that with his play in Detroit. But could you imagine if he never got to LA? He might be someone that would be slipping through the cracks of NFL history here, but he did end up in LA and he was already going to be a Hall of Famer, but he's going to have another line on his resume. 719-247-1313. Take your thoughts on the MVP. Should it have been Drake May, or do you agree with Matthew Stafford? I'm okay with that. I'm not okay with the way the Coach of the Year voting went. I'll get into that coming up next here on 740 KVOR. Fellas, Valentine's Day, basically the 2-minute drill of romance, and Louisa Graff Jewelers has the perfect game plan. We're giving away a lab-grown diamond heart pendant worth $299. All you need to do to get entered is go to kvor.com and enter to win, but do it before Sunday. And thanks to our friends at Louisa Graff Jewelers for hooking us up, or allowing us to hook you up with a lab-grown diamond heart pendant for Valentine's Day. Our question of the day, if you want to get in on that, is Super Bowl prediction, who you got, or if you want to go even further than that. My buddy Mark Moses put out a question on his Facebook page, which halftime show are you going to be watching? We got into that conversation a little bit. I like both equally, which is to say that I am not like over the moon excited for either one of them. But any Super Bowl related take you got, I'm here for it at 719-247-1313, or you can answer our post on Facebook, either 740 KVOR or Extra Sports 1300. Brandon gave his thoughts and said that the Seahawks would win by what I believe would be a Super Bowl record, 175-0. I don't believe we have had a Super Bowl that has been that high scoring, and that high scoring in favor of one team. But that's Brandon's prediction on the KVR Facebook page. I'm going a little bit more conservative. I'm with Brandon on the Seahawks. I got like 27-20 Seattle. With Seattle exercising some demons, with Drake May being the quarterback that makes the mistake at a crucial time against Seattle and not Russell Wilson against the Patriots. And I think that if there is a quarterback in this game that might see some ghosts, it's not Sam Darnold. It is Drake May, with all the exotic schemes that Mike McDonald has for him. I think it will be a good game. I think it will be worth the watch, but I think Seattle ultimately proves to be the better team. Last night, Mike Vrabel, speaking of Super Bowl participants, Mike Vrabel was named Coach of the Year. And I'm okay with that. And I've been saying this. There are so many great coaching candidates because of how wide open the NFL was, how much parity there was this year. There were so many great coaching jobs. There were so many good ones, in fact, that I felt like the job that Sean Payton did in many years would win him Coach of the Year, and he wasn't even a finalist. And I'm okay with that. I don't think he would crack a list of the best 5 or 6 coaching jobs we have seen in the NFL this season. But in a lot of years, what Sean Payton did this year with the Denver Broncos, I think would be worthy. So I don't have a problem with Vrabel. What I do have a problem with, and I know why they do the rank choice, and I know why they do the first, second, and third place votes. I hate it. I just wish they do it so they're nominees. They're finalists. Right? So if they just did pick your Coach of the Year or pick your MVP, this year it would have been May, Stafford, Herbert, and Allen. But some years, like last year, did anybody get a first place vote other than Lamar and Josh Allen? So that's why they do it. They say you need to rank your votes, so we have a set of finalists. Because we don't want to have one guy this year and be like, well, we're not going to tell you who's nominated because there's only one guy who was unanimous and steal the thunder of NFL honors. So I understand the utility. I'm just saying I hate it. And I hate it because of reasons like this. To me, Ben Johnson was the NFL Coach of the Year. I think he was a coach whose team far exceeded expectation. I think that he may have won the toughest division in football. You could talk about the NFC West or the NFC North. They each had, if they were like that meme with the dragon heads, the Hydra heads, and there's one that's kind of like Doofy, it would be the Vikings in the North and the Cardinals in the West. But Detroit was a good team. Green Bay was a very good team. And Chicago was the best team in that division. So the exceeded expectations to me, my expectations by a wide margin. And I thought Chicago would be improved. I did. I thought they would be, like 8-9 wins, which is pretty good considering what they were last year. But they were even better than that. And they won an incredibly difficult division. And I know you're not supposed to bring one year to the next, but man, it is hard to shake how bad Caleb Williams and the Chicago Bears looked last year and how good they looked this year. I mean, the job he did with Caleb Williams, to me, would have been my vote. I don't have a problem with Vrabel winning. I don't. But the issue I have is that Ben Johnson, who to me was the most deserving, if I were voting, I would have been one of two people who would have voted for Ben Johnson for Coach of the Year. He got one vote. And I get it. There are a lot of deserving candidates, but come on. Ben Johnson was in one person's mind. Ben Johnson did the best job of any coach in the NFL. Only one of the voters thought that. Like, to me, and I get, Liam Cohen, Kyle Shanahan, both certainly deserving of being included. To me, it's kind of like the MVP. The MVP to me was, even though there were other names that maybe, I don't actually think that there were other names. But most years, Christian McCaffrey, for instance, we know he's not going to win because quarterbacks win. But what was the common thread? Why were the 49ers able to do as well as they did this year despite all the injuries? Well, Christian McCaffrey was healthy. So I understand why they're included, the purpose of that, but I also understand why people really like the job that Liam Cohen did with the Jaguars and Kyle Shanahan did with the 49ers. I love what Kyle Shanahan did with the 49ers. But to me, it ultimately came down to Ben Johnson or Mike Vrabel. And I guess I was expecting to see a vote that was as close between Vrabel and Johnson as the vote between Drake May and Matthew Stafford. And what I got was Ben Johnson was even close. Ben Johnson was a distant fourth behind Cohen, Vrabel, and Shanahan. One person thought that Ben Johnson was the coach of the year. That's wild to me. I think Ben Johnson was the most deserving in a group of all very deserving candidates. Take your thoughts. Stafford over May and Mike Vrabel being named Coach of the Year. Not that there was a lot of controversy surrounding Vance Joseph. Did not beat out Josh McDaniels for Assistant Coach of the Year. I don't think that's an issue. I don't even think it's a problem that Nick Bonito was fourth in the Defensive Player of the Year voting. I really don't. But there's something else that was released last night that Nick Bonito was absolutely snubbed from. And I'll tell you what that is coming up next here on 740 KVOR. So no individual awards, or at least no big individual awards for any members of the Denver Broncos last night, because Nick Bonitto did not win Defensive Player of the Year. Myles Garrett did, and I think that is 1,000% the right call. I mean, all the guy did was break the single-season sack record. But there's a little bit of a inconsistency here by the same voting block. So Nick Bonitto was a finalist for Defensive Player of the Year. Finished, I believe, 4th in the voting, but who cares where he finished in the voting? The fact of the matter is, he was deemed as one of the 4 best defensive players in the league this year. Okay. All pro teams come out. Nick Bonitto, pass rusher. All right. First team. You look at the first team for edge rushers. Myles Garrett, no argument here. Will Anderson, sure. Micah Parsons over Nick Bonitto. Sure about that? I seem to remember Micah Parsons missing a significant chunk of time this year. But okay, difference of opinion. Fine. Let's go to second team, because surely Nick Bonitto will be on there. Brian Burns, Danielle Hunter, and Aiden Hutchinson. The Houston, because here's the thing. Well, there's a lot of pass rushers on the Denver Broncos, right? It's tough for one guy to win it. Well, Houston has 2. Houston had both of their edge rushers. Nick Bonitto being one of the 4 best defensive players in the league this year, by the same voting block that votes for the All-Pro team, mind you. Okay, if you didn't think Nick Bonitto was one of the 4 best defensive players in the league this year, then that's fine. And if you say he's not an All-Pro either, all right, that's a tough stance to take. But at least you didn't think he was one of the 4 best defensive players, regardless of position, and not an All-Pro. That's exactly what the voters here decided. I did the math on this. This is impossible. It is impossible for a player who is deemed one of the 4 best on his side of the football to not be deemed one of the 6 best at his own position. That math does not math. And I still think all pro teams matter. Forget Pro Bowl. I don't care about Pro Bowls. All pro teams matter. Nick Bonitto not being one of the 6 best edge rushers in the league is objectively a lie. That is objectively wrong. He is absolutely one of the 6 best pass rushers this year in the National Football League. But for him to be, and I don't even know if I totally agree with him being up for Defensive Player of the Year. But the fact is, this isn't even about my opinion. This is about the fact that of all the positions on the defensive side of the football, and multiply that by the number of players that play those positions, Nick Bonitto is deemed one of the 4 best. Even if I'm going to take out the calculator. I should have done this earlier. I'm busting out the calculator. All right, so you have 11 players on the defensive side, and you multiply that by 32 players, 32 teams, all just there. Forget the depth guys. Out of 352 starters on defense in the NFL, Nick Bonito was deemed to be one of the 4 best. And at his position, where they give away 6 spots for, 64 guys? Essentially. Right? 2 edge rushers per team times 32. You see where this math doesn't make any sense? So that was the injustice perpetrated on the Denver Broncos last night. Now, look, they did get Pat Surtain. They did get Zach Allen as interior rusher. Garrett Bowles was an all-pro, but not considered the protector of the year, which I don't know if I totally agree with that he's not more deserving than Penny Sewell. But this thing with Nick Bonito, I mean, this is egregious. And you know me, I am not one to take up for Denver Broncos players. I am not one to be effusive with my praise of the Denver Broncos. I set a pretty high bar that the Broncos have to reach for me to give them praise. Nick Bonito not being one of the 6 best edge rushers in the National Football League is absolutely ridiculous. And it's made all the more ridiculous by the fact that he was deemed by the same people as one of the 4 best defensive players in the league, regardless of position. This makes no sense. But now you start to think, all right, Ben Johnson only gets 1 vote for Coach of the Year. 3 people voted for Josh Allen to be the MVP this year. The NFL, the Pro Football Hall of Fame went the way it did when it comes to Belichick and Kraft. And it's like there's some overlap in these voting blocks. And it's like, unfortunately, now it makes a little bit more sense. I mean, granted, still doesn't make sense, but more sense. What's more than no sense? That's crazy. That's crazy to me. Nick Bonito could be considered like it's hurting my brain. Man, I feel for Nick Bonito. He got absolutely snubbed. That's crazy. That's wrong. I'm sorry, Nick Bonito. And then there was the highlight of the night in many ways, which was the latest class of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, which the only player from the modern era that did not get in that I said a couple of weeks ago that I would have voted for was Jason Witten. But Breeze, Fitzgerald, get the other ones here. Make sure to give full credit. But I remember the only one that I didn't that I said I thought should make it and didn't was Jason Witten and Luke Kuechly, Larry Fitzgerald, and Adam Vinatieri. Breeze, Kuechly, Fitzgerald, Vinatieri. I had all of those. And then I also had Jason Witten, but he didn't get enough votes to get in. We'll see if he gets in future years. So no problem whatsoever with that, though. I think Jason Witten's a Hall of Famer. As long as these people don't let it drag on for too long, then fine. I don't understand. You have the spot. Like, they could have voted in one more person. And that could have been Jason Witten. Doesn't make a ton of sense to me, but certainly the guys who they voted in are certainly deserving. And now we finally find out who gets in, who is supposedly more deserving than Bill Belichick. And it's Roger Craig. And Roger Craig alone. So these yahoos who already, or I shouldn't, not all of them, enough of them, who didn't think that Bill Belichick deserved to be rubber stamped into the Hall of Fame, couldn't even get to an agreement to get 3 people in, which they are allowed to do. They were so split with their whatever stupid agenda they were trying to carry out that ended up in a group where there was multiple, like Robert Kraft is a Hall of Fame owner. Bill Belichick's a Hall of Fame coach. I was fully expecting to see 3 players. Nope, just 1. And by the way, Roger Craig, absolutely deserving. Congratulations to him. But you to use a football term, fumbled this so bad that only 1 guy ended up getting in. You were so split in that room that when you went to cast your ballot, you were only able to get 1 guy enough votes to get in. And Kraft and Belichick are 2 guys that aren't getting in. I mean, regardless of who, look, if they would have put in 3 people and one of them was not Belichick, they would have gotten it wrong. Okay, so there's the first miscarriage of football justice, all right? And that's the big thing, is that because of their, agendas or trying to stick it to Bill Belichick, he didn't get enough votes to get in. That is the original sin here. But every day that goes by, it just compounds it. Oh, you're also not voting in Robert Kraft? Well, that's kind of dumb. But at least at the end, surely they would have put in 3 players. Surely that's what they would have done. Right? Because then the argument would be, okay, who's more valuable? Owners, coaches, players. And unequivocally, it's players. No doubt about it. But you had 3 spots and you ended up putting in 1 player. So clearly there weren't 3 players more deserving than Bill Belichick and Robert Kraft, which makes the fact that you didn't put either of them in, more so Belichick than Kraft, even dumber. This Veterans Committee is... There has to be some investigation. I mean, this is ridiculous. If it would have been 3 players, I would have still disagreed with it. I would have said that guy's not more of a Hall of Famer than Bill Belichick is, but at least they would have put in players who are more consequential to winning and losing. They couldn't even find 2 other players. Roger Craig was the only one. It could have been Roger Craig, Bill Belichick, and a phenomenal class. Think about how good that class would have been. Breeze, Fitzgerald, Kuechly, Vinatieri, and also not that you have to vote them in because of this, but wouldn't it have been a cool thing for Belichick and Vinatieri to go in together? Fitzgerald, Breeze, Kuechly, Belichick, Roger Craig. That would have been an outstanding class, one of the better ones that I can recall. And Roger Craig. Man. But I guess Belichick and Kraft can still get put in together. Maybe they'll go in at the same time Eli does. And it could be like super awkward with Belichick, Kraft. Belichick and Kraft dynamic. And then Eli's dynamic with those two. Not that I think that Eli Manning should be in the Hall of Fame. I've been very clear that he shouldn't be, but I know he's going to get in. 719-247-1313. Did the voters get anything right last night at NFL Honors? That question is on the table and has to be discussed. One more hour on this Friday. Drive Time Sports here on 740 KVOR and KVOR.com. Hello there. Welcome in. Hour 3 on this Friday, just on KVOR with Air Force Hockey goalless after period number 1. That is on Extra Sports 1300 currently, if you'd like to check that out. But if you're here on KVOR, KVOR.com, or the KVOR app, I certainly appreciate your patronage. And if you have not downloaded the KVOR app, you totally should, because it's free. Free to download, free to use, and it is sponsored by Diversus Health, Mental Health, and Well-Being for All. The number, if you'd like to get your thoughts in on this Friday, 719-247-1313. If you're watching the show on our social media platforms, you can also drop a comment there. Perhaps you have a thought on these, which are the 3 stories that are driving the show. All right, we start with story number 1, which also happens to be our question of the day. It is the Friday before the Super Bowl. I know around these parts, this week was a little bit of a downer, given that the Denver Broncos were on the cusp. But now that it's Friday and the Super Bowl is just in a couple of days, I'm getting a little bit more geeked up for this game, and I have some other thoughts on it coming up. But the most important thing to get out, I am contractually obligated, as are all sports media members, to give predictions. And I have softened my stance on Seattle blowing out New England. I think that New England, with the now coach of the year, Mike Vrabel, and the assistant coach of the year, Josh McDaniels, for that matter, will have this team in this game. But I kind of think this is going, so much talk about what happened the last time Seattle and New England met in a Super Bowl. I kind of think for Seattle fans, this is going to exercise a ton of demons, and for Sam Darnold as well. And here's what I mean by that. I believe that Seattle's offense is going to be productive enough, unlike what happened with the Broncos with Jared Stidham in the AFC Championship. The Seattle offense is going to be productive enough to pull the Patriots out of their shell. Right? They're going to have to put up points to win this game. They're not winning the Super Bowl 10-7. And if they pull the Patriots out of their shell and make Drake May throw the football more than the Denver Broncos ended up making him, that is good news for Seattle. And I can envision a moment or moments in this game in which we remember that Drake May was having some problems taking care of the football before the AFC Championship. They're going to have to trust Drake May, the thrower of the football, a little bit more. And look, you can do worse than a guy who ended up finishing second by a single vote for MVP. But this is about the stage that 23-year-old Drake May is stepping onto. And even with how good he was this year, what one of his flaws were: ball security. The more he has to drop back and beat Seattle with his arm, the higher the likelihood that the most opportunistic defense we have seen in these playoffs in Seattle will be able to pounce and take advantage of that. And you think back to the last time these two teams met in the Super Bowl, it was a Seahawks quarterback turning the ball over at a crucial time. I could see this time the Patriot quarterback turning the ball over at a crucial time. Because, not that I think Josh McDaniels is going to make as big of a play calling error as Pete Carroll did all those years ago. But this is where the Sam Darnold redemption story comes into play. If there is a quarterback in Santa Clara on Sunday that might be seeing ghosts, it's Drake May, because of how exotic Mike McDonald can be with his blitzes and his coverages. So I think in many ways for Darnold and Seattle, I don't think it makes up for what happened all those years ago. I don't think it makes up for seeing ghosts, because Sam Darnold's always going to be brought up. But I could see a little bit of a script flipping, if you will, for Sunday's game. I got Seattle winning 27-20. And maybe the defensive player that is the most opportunistic when Drake May makes that mistake could be your Super Bowl MVP. Now, story number 2 is injuries in the NBA. Nikola Jokic has been listed as questionable for tomorrow's game against the Bulls. Meanwhile, Luka Doncic hurt his hamstring last night. Now, the early reports from Dave McMenamin of ESPN is that Luka's hamstring strain is not, say, as bad as Peyton Watson's, who's, by the way, officially announced by the Nuggets will be out at least 4 weeks. So we were all right, 4 to 6 weeks. That's what all these injuries seem to be. But it is not the worst case scenario, or even a terrible, worst case scenario when it comes to hamstring strains. But we'll see if that ultimately ends up being the diagnosis that is a grade 1 strain and not a grade 2. Grade 2 could make Luka Doncic flirt with ineligibility for postseason awards, including MVP. If Nikola Jokic misses tomorrow's game, he will be able to miss no more games if he wants to stay at the 65-game threshold. And what this is all combining to do is to put the NBA's 65-game threshold under a microscope. Because if this season plays out and Luka, who right now would be my vote for MVP, Nikola Jokic, who is many people's vote for MVP before he got hurt, and throw in Wemby, and who knows with Shea, with this abdominal strain, like the NBA is potentially looking at an MVP by default, because all the front runners and deserving candidates end up dropping off. And if that happens, even if it doesn't have to be all of them, right? If it's just Luka and Jokic, if it's even Jokic, because Michael Malone talked about this on ESPN the other night, the 65-game rule was not made for a player like Nikola Jokic, who always plays and just so happened to have a freak injury where Spencer Jones stepped on his foot. It's made for Kawhi Leonard, for Joel Embiid, for the Golden State Warriors, the teams that and players that seem to abuse the load management, the most egregious offenders when it comes to load management. One made for a guy who, if he's healthy, is out there every single night doing everything for his team, but the 65-game rule is for those other guys. So even if Jokic isn't eligible, there's going to be a conversation about the 65-game threshold. If Luka is also ineligible, then there's really going to be a conversation. And look, I like the rule. I do. Is 65 the right number? I think a conversation being had after the season is not a bad thing. Maybe it's 60. But the intent of the rule, I'm behind it. And I know that Philadelphia 76ers fans argued all those years ago, MVP is not a perfect attendance award. Yeah, but the fact that you're available, especially in today's NBA, I think that helps your case. That you're able to be out there night in and night out for your team. And there are always extenuating circumstances. Injuries do happen. Nikola Jokic is going to be a perfect case study for this because the rule wasn't made for him, and he missed a 3-week stretch, and that might be it. Although I think he's trending in a direction where he doesn't play tomorrow. But if he doesn't play tomorrow, he can play every game the rest of the way and still be eligible. But I do foresee a night, if he doesn't play tomorrow, that Nikola Jokic isn't going to play for whatever reason. And he's going to be ineligible. And we're going to have this conversation. Maybe it needs to be lowered. Maybe it is too restrictive. 65 games. I like the intent of the rule. I understand why they have to put it in, although it's kind of a sad state of affairs that it has to be put in because of what the Sixers and any team Kawhi Leonard is on, the Clippers, and the Warriors abuse this. That it's going to keep somebody like Jokic, even to an extent Luka Doncic, who do try to be out there every night, that don't like resting, don't like being load managed, that it's going to cost them a chance at an MVP at all NBA teams based on a rule that is not designed for them. I think the rule needs to be in place, but I think there's going to be a conversation of whether 65 games is a little bit too high of a bar to set. So Jokic questionable for tomorrow. If he misses tomorrow's game against the Bulls, he cannot miss another game for any reason, or else his chances at the MVP, they're gone because he would be ineligible. And as for story number 3, back to the NFL, where the NFL doled out all of their awards. No major awards for the Denver Broncos, although they did get a few on the All-Pro team. Garrett Bowles, Patrick Surtain, and Zach Allen. One player that was a glaring omission, Nick Bonitto, who earlier in the night or later in the night, I don't know what order they were in, was voted 4th for Defensive Player of the Year. And I won't belabor the point because I just talked about this. But Nick Bonitto was deemed by the voters of these awards to be the 4th best defensive player, regardless of position, in the National Football League. And yet, when the All-Pro teams came out, and there are 6 spots available just at edge rusher, and Nick Bonitto is not one of those 6 names, that makes no sense. That math doesn't math. The discussion should be whether Nick Bonitto is a first or second team, because the third guy on the first team is Micah Parsons, who you recall missed a decent stretch of time at the end of the year. You remember the very game that he got hurt. So to me, the argument should be whether Nick Bonitto should be a first-teamer or a second-team All-Pro, but the idea of whether he's an All-Pro at all didn't even enter into my mind because, again, the same voters who picked the All-Pro team said that Nick Bonitto was one of the 4 best defensive players in the National Football League. Make it make sense. And I say that knowing full well, can't. It's an indefensible position. And all pros matter. All pros impact Nick Bonitto's earning power. If we get that far down the road, his Hall of Fame chances. It's a significant thing that Nick Bonitto was screwed out of last night. And it's not even one of those we're debating. There's another award that he was up for that should mean he is a shoo-in to be one of the 6 best edge rushers in the NFL this year, which he was. But 3 people voted for Josh Allen for MVP. Only 1 person voted for Ben Johnson for Coach of the Year. So there were, Nick Bonitto wasn't the only guy who got gypped, and he's not, that's not the only set of awards that there were some questionable decisions on last night. 719-247-1313. Take your thoughts on the 3 stories that are driving the show. Coming up next, speaking of Broncos edge rushers, both past and present, one more case made by Von Miller to become a Denver Bronco. Are you buying it? Has he sold you? That's next here on not Extra Sports 1300. Just 740 KVOR for right now. consider this your last reminder to get entered to win a lab-grown diamond heart pendant worth $299 from our friends at Louisa Graff Jewelers. That contest ends on Sunday. You could go to kvor.com and enter to win that, and then you'll be all set for Valentine's Day. You won't have to deal with any last-minute shopping for that. So thanks to our friends at Louisa Graff for providing that awesome prize. So he's at it again. Von Miller making a case on Aqib Talib's No Lie Zone podcast. Pretty good name for a podcast. Making a more compelling argument, perhaps, for why he deserves to be back with the Denver Broncos. Take a listen.
So it's not like I got to come and play 60% of the plays out there. I can come in. I'm good with coming off the bench. I'm not going to be cheap, but I can be bought. We can figure that out. Still don't have to pay both nicks. And then I think what I'm able to bring to the team outside of rushing the passer, the camaraderie element of it, the spirit, the core, the energy. This Broncos team is going to be ready to go next year. And I think that's when you plug in Von Miller. I'll be able to guide and get the guys ready to go for each and every game.
That last part, I think, is a key. If this reunion is going to happen. And you know what? Let me say this off the top. I think he's going to be a Denver Bronco again. I think he's going to be back with the Denver Broncos. He's the one doing the puffing, but there is so much smoke now. Like, he is just going on and on and on about this, and he's not going to stop. This will not be the last time Von Miller is going to make a case. This is quickly becoming, along with Davis Webb, will he get play calling duties? Is Von Miller coming back to the Denver Broncos? And I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen, but the last part that he had there, I think, is crucial. Because from my sources, Von Miller wasn't necessarily the greatest influence on a young Broncos team. Okay, and he's certainly not the first guy. I mean, he's not terrible. We know Von Miller, the work he does in the community, this is not about Von Miller being a bad guy. But there is a way people go about their business, and there are some, the way I would characterize it is there are some players who can get away with maybe not having the exact work ethic that is required and can kind of get away with it because they are so supremely talented. And that's kind of Von Miller. But the problem is when you have a young team, that is not a good influence. So I'm not talking about, although Von Miller has had his off the field questions, certainly. I think the last go-round, Von Miller wasn't a great fit for a young rebuilding team for a couple of different reasons. One, because his career was on a different, was at a different point in his career arc than many Broncos players were at that time. Right? And what did George Payton do? He did the smart thing. Take somebody that's not going to be on the next best Broncos team, although ironically, if he's back with the Broncos next year, he probably will be on a pretty good Broncos team. But trades him to a contending team, right? Broncos, as they were going, were not in a position to compete anytime soon. They had to get rid of Russell Wilson. They had to bring in Sean Payton, not necessarily in that order. They had to draft Bo Nix. Like, they had to get a lot right to get to where they are now, And when they traded Von Miller, there were no signs that they were heading down the right path. So things change. In the moment, it was absolutely the right decision to trade Von Miller. So he wasn't a fit because he was at a different stage in his career than the rest of the Broncos were. He was ready to win now. The Broncos weren't. But I have been told, in terms of work habits, even though for Von Miller it's fine because he's so good that he doesn't need to maybe grind the way some others do, but it was not the kind of message that the Broncos wanted to send through that locker room. So that last part there with Von Miller talking about the impact he would have on the room, as long as that extends to, and this is a different group. This is a more established group. Nick Bonito knows what he has to do to get himself ready for Sundays. Jonathan Cooper, the same way. But if when they sit down with Von Miller, if they sit down with Von Miller, I think that's going to have to be something that he stresses to them, like, hey, I'm going to fit into this room. And if you're the Broncos, you like hearing the first part too, where he's like, I don't have to play all the time. He understands where he is in his career, and he also understands that the Denver Broncos have two pass rushers that are right now unequivocally better than he is, in Jonathan Cooper and Nick Bonito. So the realization of where he's at in his career now, in terms of playtime expectation, that's something that I think the Broncos need to hear. And then they need to hear that Von Miller is going to fit with the culture of this team. So now it's just the one piece that he has to iron out. He has to rectify that part about how much it will cost. The Denver Broncos don't need to be overpaying for Von Miller. If Von Miller is desperate enough to come back to the Denver Broncos, he needs to take a team-friendly deal. And when I brought this conversation up a couple of weeks ago, when he said what he said on his podcast about how he believes he could have made the play that Jonah Ellis didn't, although he went out of his way to say, I'm not pointing the fingers at anybody, but then proceeded to point the fingers at people because there was one guy that had a chance to catch Drake May and didn't. Which also speaks to fitting in with the culture. But when we brought this conversation up the last time, I heard from many of you who said, yes, on a team-friendly deal. Yes, if he's willing to take less money. That's the third part here. There's three pillars of Von Miller returning to the Denver Broncos. One, he has to know his role with the team. That his days of being the best pass rusher on a team are over. Not at least the best pass rusher on a contending team. That's over. And he's going to be down on the depth chart. If he understands that, if he's going to come in and not be a disruption to the culture that the Denver Broncos have built, right? And that's on and off the field. And then the third thing is you got to meet the Broncos more than halfway on your contract demands. But if he checks those three boxes, if he fulfills those three requirements, then he will be back with the Denver Broncos. And I would think, Von Miller, he makes jokes. I think when he sits down across from Sean Payton and George Payton, who aren't, in the business of overpaying for guys, they sit down and they say, we want you back, but it's this number. I think maybe in behind closed doors at the negotiating table, I think Von Miller's going to back off of his, I'm not cheap. You got to be cheap. Broncos don't need to be. They finally got all this money, finally got out from under the Russell Wilson contract and the dead cap money, and then Von Miller is coming in making big demands for his salary. Like, that's not going to fly. Know your role within the team, that this is about, the prodigal son returning and all the feel goodery that comes along with that, and somebody that can provide depth, quality depth at that position, somebody who is going to buy into what Sean Payton has established as the culture that has been a wildly successful culture that he has cultivated, which means distractions of any kind have got to be not at a minimum, at zero. And then you got to take a team-friendly deal. If the Broncos are going to be splashing the cash, it's not going to be on an older backup pass rusher. But I do think we're certainly heading in a direction where he's going to end up back with the Denver Broncos. He's not going to stop this, and the drum beat is going to get louder and louder when the offseason rolls around and free agency comes around. There's going to be a lot of people around these parts that are begging for Von Miller to come back. And not that fan input is what George Payton and Sean Payton take into account when making decisions, but I got to imagine there will be a few guys in the Broncos building that will be saying, hey, we'd really like this guy back. So Broncos fans, you'll get your wish. Von Miller will come back. I don't know that it's worth it, but it looks like I think we're heading in the direction that he will be back with the Denver Broncos to close out his career. Take your thoughts at 719-247-1313. Coming up next, what Sam Darnold winning a Super Bowl would actually say about what the NFL does with their quarterbacks, because I think it was a little bit misrepresented earlier in the week by a national personality. Get to that and a little look ahead at the first weekend of the Olympics. Lindsey Vonn back out on the mountain today. Tell you how she did, or I won't. Somebody will help me tell you how she did in her first Olympic practice. That's next on 740 KVOR. Opening ceremonies have taken place out in Italy. You could see those tonight on in primetime on NBC. But the big story that has gotten even bigger over the last couple of days is Lindsey Vonn. Despite rupturing her ACL, we call it tearing, but that's I guess the technical term is that she ruptured it, is going to compete anyway and try to complete this Olympic comeback, and maybe she hopes win a medal to close out her career at 41 years old. Now, she had her first practice run of the Olympics. She will have one tomorrow, and then she will compete Sunday morning at 5:30 if you happen to be up. But no doubt, whatever she does is going to be chronicled on NBC in their primetime coverage. Here are our colleagues at Fox News reporting on how it went this morning for Lindsey Vonn.
41-year-old American downhill skier Lindsey Vonn on the Team USA roster to compete in her 5th Winter Olympics and scheduled for her first race Sunday in the women's downhill. Friday successfully ran her first training run, 1 week since she ruptured the ACL in her left knee in a skiing crash, and also suffered meniscal damage and bone bruising. Vonn, who retired from skiing in 2019 and then unretired late in 2024, is competing now with a partial titanium implant in her right knee, opposed to the left knee she injured last week in a World Cup race. After Friday's training run, Vonn ranked 11th out of 44 who competed. American Jacqueline Wiles first. Jared Max, Fox News.
And I saw that she reached 74 miles an hour on her run. So, look, right in there, it tells you what I said the other day. Okay? Everyone is rooting for her. I'm especially rooting for Lindsey Vonn. I think it would be an amazing story if she were to medal, even more so now. But her first run, and she doesn't get that much time. Now, there's some reports that she was just kind of testing it out a little bit, and tomorrow might be more indicative of how she will fare when the competition begins on Sunday. But that being said, to go from 11th to a top 3 spot, she'd really have to be testing it out today. So I do doubt that she is going to end up on the podium, but I so hope to be wrong about this. But even if she doesn't, it is still remarkable what she is trying to do. And just if she makes it to Sunday and competes and finishes her race, that will be more impressive than some of the medals. It will be that other athletes will win, given what Lindsey Vonn is dealing with. And you would think that everybody would just be on the same page and just would rally around her and hope that she does great and admire what she is trying to do. But I should also know better, because social media exists, and it is not unanimous in the admiration and awe that we are in when it comes to Lindsey Vonn. Some guy who claims to be an MD on Twitter had a very long post. I'll save you the medicalese that he put in. But basically, he's saying that he doubts that her ACL was fine and now it's gone. And he brings up, some people have prior damage and the muscles end up compensating for it, and you can actually compete. He's basically doubting that her ACL was good and now it's gone and she's out there competing. Lindsey Vonn clapped back on Twitter by saying, LOL, thanks, Doc. My ACL was fully functioning until last Friday. Just because it seems impossible to you doesn't mean it's not possible. And yes, My ACL is 100% ruptured, not 80% or 50%. It's 100% gone. Go, Lindsay. I might have to get up and watch that live to see how she fares. And have you been watching her on it? She's posting her workouts on Instagram. And I guess in a way I can understand the skepticism because she posted her workouts and she's working out like a beast. Like you wouldn't even be able to tell that she was without her ACL. Why would she make this up? Come on. Nobody was really expecting her to medal. It was just the comeback and the story of it all. Maybe she was expecting to medal, but I don't think a lot of people were when she announced that she would be coming back. We're just enjoying the comeback and letting whatever result happen. Oh, she's making up that she tore her ACL. Okay, bro. Good for Lindsay. Rooting for her, certainly. Coming up on Sunday. Tomorrow, Air Force. U.S. women's hockey is back in action. They won 5-1 yesterday, and they'll be back in action this weekend. Men's hockey with all those Avs players does not start till the 11th, so we got a little bit of time, but the Olympics get going in earnest this weekend, and Lindsey Vonn will be the main event, if not being the main event of the entire Winter Games. I'll be doing some Olympic updates that will air here on KVOR, focusing on the biggest stories of the Olympics, but more so the Colorado athletes, which Lindsey Vonn happens to be one of, Michaela Schifrin, and there are many others spanning a lot of different sports, so I'll keep you updated, especially with the time difference, and maybe tough to keep up with what's going on, and I'll try to do my best throughout the day here on KVOR starting on Monday, so look out for those. Let me close here with some thoughts on what is possible Sunday and what is probably the biggest story going into Sunday and what may be the biggest story coming out of Sunday, and that is Sam Darnold. I heard this week, early in the week, that Sam Darnold is an example of how NFL teams give up on quarterbacks too soon. And the argument by Mike Greenberg of ESPN, who I'm a huge fan of, I can disagree with somebody that I'm a huge fan of, and I don't disagree with the sentiment. I'm just saying I don't think Sam Darnold is exactly this. So what Mike Greenberg was talking about on Get Up earlier this week was the idea that teams are constantly searching for the next Allen, Mahomes, Lamar, Burrow, if you will, that they can have a good quarterback and not be content. Right? And this hits home a little bit because Bo Nix is in this realm right now. Right? Is he Allen? Is he Mahomes? Is he Lamar Jackson? No. He's a good quarterback, and he contributed to one of the best seasons any NFL team had this year. Got the top seed in the AFC. And being on a rookie deal, that's good enough. When he's set to get a ton of money, then it's a different conversation. But I would say what Mike Greenberg was referring to is more of Baker Mayfield. The story of Baker Mayfield is that he was good, but not good enough. He was good, but not elite. And the Cleveland Browns shipped him off in order to bring in a quarterback that they thought was on the level of Allen, Mahomes, and Lamar in Deshaun Watson. And obviously it's gone terribly wrong for many a different reason, and the biggest reasons have nothing to do with Deshaun Watson's talent. But that's the example of a team giving up on a quarterback too soon, or saying we know what we have, but it's still not good enough for us. Sam Darnold would not be in this position if he would have stayed in New York. New York did not bail on Sam Darnold early, nor did Carolina. What Sam Darnold is a story of is how there are still too many teams in this league that don't know how to do the most important thing, which is develop and coach quarterbacks. Sam Darnold would have never been in this position if he stayed in New York, because New York did not have the coaching, the supporting cast to develop Sam Darnold into what he is now. Carolina at the time did not have that support system in place. San Francisco does. The Shanahan coaching tree. If you got one of those guys, look at Malik Willis. Somebody's going to give Malik Willis a shot to be their starter this year and is going to pay him to do it because of what he was able to do for Matt LaFleur this year, filling in for Jordan Love. McVay, Shanahan, LaFleur, and there are others, Sean Payton, that know how to develop quarterbacks. So many teams don't. That's what Sam Darnold is a story of how where you end up matters more than anything else in the draft. Where you're taken, monetarily matters, but in terms of your future success, where you go matters. And the idea that franchises bust as much, if not more, than quarterbacks do. The Jets franchise is the bust, not Sam Darnold. But the Jets did not give up on Sam Darnold too soon because they had no chance of cultivating what Kyle Shanahan and Kevin O'Connell and now Mike McDonald and Clint Kubiak have been able to do. The Jets had no chance. Carolina had no chance. That's what Sam Darnold is a story of if you don't have the coaches, the supporting cast in place to support these young quarterbacks, you have no chance to get a franchise quarterback out of them. And this conversation will come up again, especially if Sam Darnold wins on Sunday. It's going to come up with Fernando Mendoza and all of these quarterbacks that are going to be taken in April. Where they go matters. Now, the fact that Mendoza is going to be coached by Clint Kubiak, I think that's a good sign for Fernando Mendoza, but there's certainly a lot of other issues with the infrastructure in Vegas. But the Jets didn't give up on Sam Darnold too soon. They just didn't have the tools necessary to make Sam Darnold into what he is today. But San Francisco, Minnesota, and Seattle do. And Seattle might end up being the one that benefits the most from all of this if Sam Darnold ends up hoisting the Lombardi Trophy on Sunday, as I think he will. Enjoy the game. You could hear it right here on 740 KVOR. We'll be back on Monday at 3 to discuss that and hopefully no Nuggets injuries that we will be reporting on Monday. Have a great weekend. You're listening to 740 KVOR.